The debt collector said her mother's care could become complicated, and Ella's hands were shaking inside her pockets when the alley went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. 5 black SUVs, one immaculate man in a black suit, walking past 3 stunned loan sharks without breaking stride. And then he was on one knee in front of her on wet concrete, his coat around her shoulders, telling her he'd bought her debt that morning. She should have run. She would have run from any other man on earth. But his voice had cracked something open in her chest, because it was the same voice that had once said thank you so quietly in a school cafeteria that she'd almost missed it. And that boy had been the only person she'd ever defended who then disappeared without a trace. Every school has a hierarchy. Harim Elite didn't bother hiding theirs. The sons of senators owned the front rows. The daughters of CEOs wrote the dress code with their bodies. Athletes walked the hallways like they were conducting inspections. And at the very bottom of all of it, beneath the noise, the performance, the daily currency of cruelty that institutions like this run on, there was Choi Insu. He had a system. Arrive at 7:43. 11 minutes before the first bell, when the hallways were still mostly empty, and the probability of being seen was statistically lower. Corner seat, 3rd floor cafeteria. Bag positioned against the chair leg as a buffer. Eat fast. Head down through every hallway. Home by 4:17. It wasn't a life, but it was a system. And systems kept you functional when everything else was trying to break you. He was 16. His uniform had been bought one size too small because there was no budget for another. The buttons strained. The collar wouldn't sit right no matter how many times he adjusted it. His glasses had snapped at the left bridge 3 months ago and been repaired with a strip of tape because new frames weren't in the budget either. He was not invisible. Invisible would have been mercy. He was visible. Specifically, deliberately visible, as the thing that made everyone else feel larger by comparison. His name was Insu. At Harim Elite, they called him other things. He had a secret that the system was built to protect. At the bottom of his bag, underneath the textbooks, wrapped in a plastic sleeve so the pages wouldn't wrinkle, a cheap spiral-bound sketchbook. Inside it, Insu drew cities. Not the soul outside Harim's windows, the gray, hierarchical, transactional soul that had already decided what he was worth before he arrived. He drew cities that didn't exist yet. Elevated rail systems with soft lighting designed for people who worked night shifts. Community libraries open at midnight for insomniacs and students with no quiet at home. Schools built around what students loved rather than what they could be ranked by. He drew them with technical precision, measurements, load calculations, sight lines, material notes in the margins. Taught himself the architectural notation from a second-hand textbook he'd found for 2001 at a used bookstore in Mapo. Nobody at Harim knew about the sketchbook. That was the point. He thought he had kept it safe. He was wrong. It was a Wednesday. Insu had been 5 minutes late. A teacher had held him back. And Junho's group had arrived at the corner first. Kang Junho, son of a property developer. Student council vice president. The kind of boy who had never once questioned whether he belonged in a room, because every room he'd ever entered had reorganized itself around him by the time he finished walking through the door. He had already picked up the sketchbook. It had slid from Insu's half-open bag at the cafeteria entrance, and was holding it open to the middle by the time Insu processed what was happening. The cafeteria arranged itself the way it always did when Junho had material. Chairs angled. Conversations died. The specific collective attention of people who wanted entertainment without responsibility. What is this? Junho held it up, pages fanned open, the careful lines, the measurements. 6 weeks of work. Pig Boy's drawing his dream house? Laughter scattered across 3 tables. He turned another page. Oh, this one has a garden. He addressed the room with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted the room's loyalty. He drew himself a garden. For when he, what? Eats the flowers? Insu walked across the cafeteria. Direct line. He stopped in front of Junho and held out his hand. Please, he said. The word cost him something real. Junho turned another page. His voice dropped into mock tenderness. He drew a school where nobody gets bullied. Little note. Safe room for students. He showed the page to the nearest table. Is that for you, Insuya? Your safe room? The cafeteria was very quiet in the way that crowds go quiet when they're watching something wrong and have collectively decided not to intervene. Insu's hand was still out. His jaw was working with the effort of keeping everything behind his face. He had learned this early. The moment it showed, they had won something they could carry with them. So he held the line, hand extended, face neutral, waiting. Then a chair scraped back. She wasn't dramatic about it. That was the thing people always got wrong when they remembered it later. They remembered it as a performance, as a grand entrance, as something cinematic. It wasn't. She was just walking to get food before the rice ran out, and she saw something that bothered her, and she dealt with it. 3 weeks at Harim. American-born, Lagos-raised, Seoul arrived. A trajectory that had given her an intimate relationship with being the new thing in a room and a complete absence of patience for watching cruelty perform for an audience. She crossed the cafeteria, straight line, no announcement. She reached up and took the sketchbook directly out of Junho's raised hand, the same tone as retrieving a dropped pen, turned to Insu and held it out. Your book, she said. The cafeteria went absolutely silent. Junho stared at her. He was running the calculation she'd just broken. The crowd, his position, the correct response, and coming up empty, because she had done the one thing that dismantled the geometry of the scene entirely. She had made it boring, not confrontational, not dramatic, just boring. A book returned to its owner. Nothing to watch here. Mind yours, he said. A recovery attempt. She looked at him with the patience of someone who had been underestimated so many times it had stopped registering as an event. I just did. Then she sat down at Insu's table and opened her lunch and ate. Junho stood for a moment, long enough for the audience to notice the scene had ended without him closing it, and walked away. The politics of black women navigating Korean school hierarchies. A future video exploring how Ella's outsider status became her greatest weapon in a system she refused to learn to fear. Insu held the sketchbook under the table with both hands, closed, pages undamaged. He stared at the girl eating her lunch with the focused calm of someone who had already moved on. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know. He's going to say things about you now. He was already going to. She picked up her chopsticks. That's not a reason. He looked at the table. Something in his chest was doing something he had no vocabulary for yet. Why? She didn't look at him when she answered. She said it to the air, not as a performance. Because someone drew a school with a safe room, she said quietly. And that person deserves to keep their drawings. Insu said nothing, but for the first time in 7 months at Harim Elite, he ate his lunch without counting the minutes until it was over. She came back the next day. This was the thing Insu had not accounted for. Most people who performed a kindness in public were doing it for the public. The kindness existed in the moment, dissolved when the audience dispersed. He had cataloged this enough times to treat it as law. Ella came back the next day and the day after, not with the energy of someone maintaining a charity project. She came back the way you return to something because you want to. She talked about Lagos, a teacher who had made her read a novel in 3 days and how she had loved the pressure of it. The specific debate about whether Korean tteokbokki or jollof rice delivered more emotional satisfaction, a question she took with complete seriousness. Sometimes she sat in comfortable silence while he sketched and she read. She never asked to see the sketchbook. He showed it to her on the fourth day. She had said something about a bridge near Myeongdong and he just pushed it across the table without deciding to. She looked at it for a long time, traced a line with her finger, not touching the page. This notation. You taught yourself this? He nodded. She looked up at him directly. Insu? This is extraordinary. He had received compliments before, teachers, exam scores, and they had always passed through him without leaving a mark, because they came from people who saw the output, not the person producing it. Ella said it looking at him. Like the extraordinary thing was not the calculation, but the person who had made it quietly in a corner for no audience at all. His face went warm. He looked at the table. It's just drawings. Sure, she said, and her tone made clear she didn't believe him at all. He didn't tell her she was the first person who had ever made him feel like his presence in a room was not an imposition. He didn't tell her that the city in the sketchbook had, over several weeks, grown a detail. A cafe near the elevated rail station where two people ate lunch, without performing for anyone. He didn't tell her any of this. He thought he had time. He was catastrophically wrong. It was a Thursday. Ella had stayed late at the library. Insu was walking home alone, 2 blocks from the bus stop, when the black car pulled up beside him. He didn't run. It happened too fast for running. The door opened from inside. 1 man stepped out, then 2 more from the car behind. Insu's bag was on the ground and his arm was held before his mind had finished registering the threat. The man who stepped from the front car last was older, late 50s, silver-haired, posture like something forged rather than grown. He studied Insu the way you examine something you've been waiting to collect. You look like your father, the man said. Not warmly. My name is Choi Byung-man, he said. I am your grandfather. You are coming with me. Insu said no. This turned out to be the kind of answer that gets noted and dealt with once you are already in the car. The last thing he saw over the shoulder of the man holding his arm was the bus stop 2 blocks back. Empty. The city continuing its evening without him. He thought, she'll think I didn't come back because I didn't want to. He thought, I need to get a message to her. He never got a message to her. The car drove north for 4 hours. And then he was somewhere else entirely. And for a very long time, he was inside something that didn't have space for messages. Ella waited 40 minutes. She told herself traffic. She told herself a different route. She told herself half a dozen things that were more bearable than the one thing she couldn't say yet, and when none of them resolved into him arriving, she went home. He wasn't at school the next day, or the day after. By the end of the week, she had gone to the administrative office twice and received the same non-answer both times. Enrollment withdrawn, no forwarding information, family matter. The homeroom teacher delivered this, with the neutrality of someone who had been instructed not to discuss it. She sat in the corner seat at lunch and looked at the empty chair across from her. She had learned not to cry where people could see. She had learned that from him. So she went home and cried there instead. Quietly, the way you cry when you don't entirely know what you're mourning, whether it's the person or the version of yourself that had existed alongside them. She carried that year with her, the way you carry something you can't put down and can't examine in full light. You just keep walking with the weight of it until you tell yourself you've stopped noticing it. She stopped noticing it. Or she told herself that too. 3 months earlier, she had walked into a cafeteria and sat down next to a boy the world had decided was worthless. She had watched him start walking upright. She had watched him start talking. She had watched him become, incrementally, someone who believed he was allowed to take up space. And then one Thursday, without a word, without a note, without the goodbye she hadn't known she needed until it wasn't there, he was gone. The girl who had sat down was still there. but something in her had learned quietly not to do that again. 10 years is a long time to get tired. Ella was 27. Early shift at a cafe in Mapogu. Mid-shift at a convenience store in Uido. 3 evenings a week doing inventory for a wholesale distributor whose manager paid cash and asked nothing she wanted to answer. Average 5 hours of sleep. 70% of every paycheck to her mother's medical account. The remaining 30% split between a studio apartment she shared with a woman named Soo Yeon, who worked nights, meaning they had never once been awake in the same room, and food that was fast and cheap and nothing else. Her mother had gotten sick 3 years ago. The diagnosis had arrived at the precise moment her savings had finally reached a number. That meant something. Right when the math had started to look survivable. The savings became medical bills. The bills became loans. The loans became more loans to service the first loans. Then the interest. Then the men who collected the interest. She had not asked anyone for help. This wasn't stubbornness. It was the kind of self-sufficiency that forms in a person who has been in enough situations where help either wasn't coming or came with a cost worse than the original problem. She had built her independence the same way Insu had built his system, not as a virtue, as armor. And like all armor, it had kept her upright while it quietly exhausted her down to nothing. The Thursday it broke was an ordinary Thursday. She was leaving the convenience store at 11 p.m. She took the alley that cut 3 minutes off the walk to the metro, because after a double shift, 3 minutes was worth the shortcut. They were waiting at the far end. 3 men. She recognized the one in front. She had sat across from him twice in an office, trying to renegotiate numbers that kept growing. He was not the man in the cheap suit. He was the reason you paid the man in the cheap suit. "Miss Ella," he said, conversationally, "you missed last month's payment. I sent a partial." The agreement was not partial. He glanced at the 2 men behind him. Not a signal. Just a reminder they existed. "We've been patient 2 years, but patience has a number." She did not back up. She had decided in the last 30 seconds that she was not going to back up. She had backed up in enough rooms that had decided she didn't have options. Not this one. "Tell me the number," she said. He told her. The number was more than 2 years of income from all 3 jobs combined. Interest compounded on interest, penalties on missed penalties, administrative fees whose only function was to make the total larger. "We're not unreasonable," he said. "There are other ways to service a debt this size." He looked at her with the specific assessment of a man who knew what came next. "You're a capable woman." Ella's keys were tight in her fist. She was calculating what happened after. Not escape. There was none. What she would do. Who she could call. Whether her mother's account had enough to last 2 weeks while she sorted out whatever was about to happen to her. Then the alley entrance changed. One black SUV stopped at the mouth of the alley. Then another. Then 3 more. Slow. Deliberate. Sealing the exit as completely as a poured wall. Their headlights didn't sweep. They held, filling the alley with cold, flat white. The debt collector stopped mid-sentence. His face moved through confusion, then recognition, then a color that had no name except the specific one, meaning he understood exactly how wrong the scale of this moment was. SUV doors opened. Men stepped out. Not rushing, not running, just emerging with the certainty of people who had already run the math and found the answer satisfying. They positioned themselves without instruction. Then the center car's driver door opened to last. 1 pair of shoes. Black patent leather catching light that shouldn't have been there. Then the suit. Immaculate. Black on black. Tailoring that didn't advertise itself because it had no reason to. Then the man. The debt collector's associates had backed into the wall. The man in the black suit walked past all of them. Past the collector. past his men, past the entire geometry of threat that had been built around Ella. He walked through it the way you walk past furniture towards something that matters. He stopped in front of her. He went down to one knee on wet concrete, without hesitation, without adjusting his trousers, without any indication the material cost of the gesture had entered his consideration. He looked up at her, and his eyes carried something that had been inside them for a very long time. He took off his coat, placed it across her shoulders with both hands. The warmth hit her chest before she was ready for it. "I watched that debt for 2 years," he said quietly. "Every job, every payment, every night you didn't sleep." A pause. "I bought it this morning. You don't owe them anymore." Ella's voice had somewhere stopped cooperating. "You owe it to me now." He rose. His eyes settled on her face with the complete, undivided attention of a man who had oriented his entire world around one fixed point and was now standing in front of it. "I told you I would come back." Behind him, the debt collector was already walking away. His associates were walking faster. The SUVs held until the alley was clear, then idled, patient. Ella looked at the jawline that hadn't existed in the boy she'd known, the posture that had replaced the permanent apology she remembered, the eyes that were cold to everything in the world except the specific direction of her face, where they became something dense and old and almost unbearable in its directness. Her throat closed. "Insu?" she said. The muscle in his jaw moved once. He stepped aside and gestured toward the nearest SUV. The city hummed around them, indifferent, enormous, going about its night. She stood in his cashmere coat in a filthy Seoul alley, looking at the ghost of the boy she had sat beside in a cafeteria corner a decade ago. Now a man who had arrived in a fleet of black cars to kneel on wet concrete for her. And she had approximately 9,000 questions, none of which her mouth could form. She walked toward the car. Not because she trusted this version of him. Not yet. But the boy inside the man, the one with the sketchbook of impossible cities, the one who had said, "I'll see you tomorrow," like he meant it. That boy she had trusted completely. She was choosing, for this cold Thursday, at the end of everything she had tried alone, to trust the memory. She got in. The door closed. Seoul swallowed them whole. The penthouse was the entire top floor of a building in Gangnam that appeared in no real estate listings. The lobby had no directory. The elevator required a key card, a biometric scan, and the permission of the man who lived at the top. It opened into a space Ella spent her first 20 minutes trying to find the edges of. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, Seoul below like a circuit board lit from underneath. Furniture sparse and exact. Dark wood, clean lines, nothing decorative. The kitchen was the size of her entire studio. The hallway stretched away from the main room lit so subtly, the walls seemed to glow from within. It was the most beautiful place she had ever been inside. It was also a cage. She understood this within the hour. A woman named Minji arrived at 7 with breakfast and a practiced smile and no information. Ella's phone had been charging overnight. When she got it back, there was no signal. Not low signal. None. The building's interference was total and intentional. She was not technically a prisoner. The elevator would open for her. The lobby wasn't locked. She could leave. But she had no money, no working phone, and the debt she owed was now held by the man in the black suit, which meant leaving solved nothing and created problems she couldn't yet calculate. So she stayed, and she watched. Everyone in Seoul was afraid of this man. That was the universal position. Criminal architects, government officials, men who had built empires of their own. They were all afraid of him. Ella was the only person in the city who was watching him, like a puzzle she intended to solve. He returned at 11 p.m. the first night. She was on the couch, holding a book she wasn't reading, and she watched him cross the room to the kitchen and drink water standing up, and tried to find the architecture of who this was. He was not warm, but he wasn't cold either. Cold implied indifference, and indifference meant she wasn't being tracked. She was absolutely being tracked. Every time she moved through the penthouse, he appeared in the same room within 10 minutes. Some manufactured reason. Checking something. Retrieving something. Never acknowledging what he was clearly doing. He answered direct questions with direct answers and volunteered nothing beyond them. He set 2 places at dinner every night without comment. He never remarked when she didn't sit. He never remarked when she eventually did. She didn't know what he wanted from her. On the 3rd evening, she asked him directly, "Who are you? Not the part you perform?" Actually. He set down his chopsticks with the deliberateness of a man selecting words from a carefully organized inventory. "Someone who owes you a debt," he said. "I'm settling it. I didn't ask to be settled for." "I know." "Then why?" "Because no one else was going to." Quiet. No emphasis, which made it heavier. "And I had the means, and I was not willing to watch you run out of options." "You've been watching me." "Yes." "For how long?" "A beat." "Long enough." She absorbed this. The debt. "What do you actually want in return?" "Nothing." "Nobody buys a debt the size of mine and wants nothing." For one fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but the territory where a smile came from. "You always did make an argument like you were already 3 steps ahead of it." Ella went completely still. "You always did. Not you always do." The tense was wrong. The phrasing of someone speaking from a shared history, not an introduction. She looked at the jaw, the shoulders, the controlled face of a man who had built himself into something impenetrable. She looked for 17 years ago. She couldn't find it. Not yet. She found the study on the 5th day. East hallway. Door she had assumed was storage. She tried the handle on a Tuesday afternoon and it opened. Dark wood. Clean surfaces. A desk with nothing on it. Bookshelves with books that had been read rather than displayed. Spines worn, corners folded, none arranged decoratively. A single north-facing window, and along the east wall, mounted at eye level and lit from above by a single recessed light that served absolutely no other function in the room, a glass display case, thick glass, the kind that suggested the contents were protected from something more serious than dust. Inside it, on a mount of dark fabric, was a pair of eyeglasses. Cheap frames, pharmacy counter variety, one lens slightly scratched. And across the left bridge, holding the frame together where it had broken and never been properly replaced, a strip of tape, slightly yellowed, still adhered, still doing the job it had been assigned a decade ago by a boy who couldn't afford a replacement. Ella's hand came up and rested on the glass before she decided to move it. The tape. She had seen that tape every day for a school year. She had watched him straighten the glasses on his face with one automatic finger, a habit so ingrained he didn't know he was doing it. She had seen that tape the morning Junho held the sketchbook over his head, and Insu had stood there with his hand out and asked please with the last of his dignity. She had seen those glasses the last morning she'd seen him. When he had said, "I'll see you tomorrow," and she had said obviously the way you say something you believe completely. She had never seen him again. Until the alley. The case was spotless on the outside, cleaned regularly, carefully. The tape on the bridge had been preserved, not restored, preserved, exactly as it was. For 10 years, in a locked case lit by a dedicated light, in the private room of the most feared man in Seoul. She heard the elevator open at the far end of the penthouse. She heard his footsteps, measured, unhurried, and she did not move. She waited. He appeared in the doorway. He saw her. He saw where she was standing. He saw her hand, on the glass. Everything he had been carrying when he walked in. The day, the business, the controlled performance of a man who had stopped letting the world read him years ago. It came off his face. What was underneath was not soft. That boy was 10 years gone. What was underneath was more devastating than softness. It was the look of a man who had protected one thing across an entire decade of violence, who had organized every ruthless year around keeping that one thing intact, and who was now standing in a doorway watching that thing finally be seen. "Insu," she said. Not a question. He crossed the room, stopped on the other side of the glass. His eyes moved between her face and the glasses and back. "I looked for you," she said. "I went to the office twice. I waited at the bus stop 40 minutes. I know. For 10 years I thought you just left. I know." 2 words carrying the weight of a much longer sentence. "I couldn't get a message out. Not for the first 2 years. And by then..." He stopped. "I didn't know if finding you would put you in danger or take you out of it. So you watched instead. Until the debt. Until you bought the debt." She looked at him. "You bought it so you'd be the one I owed. So no one else could use it against me." He said nothing, which was its own answer. "What's the right word?" she said. "If managing is wrong." He looked at the case, at the glasses. "Watching over," he said quietly. "The way you watch over something you don't have the right to hold yet." She understood the glasses now. But there was something she still didn't know. The 10 years between the bus stop and the alley. What his grandfather had made him into. What it had cost him to remain human inside it. He said not tonight. She said okay. But the question was still alive in the room. The room was still. She recognized him now. Not the face, not the body, but the quality underneath it. The attentiveness. The way he held himself accountable for every word the moment it left his mouth. The way he looked at her like she was the fixed point in a world he navigated by. She had recognized it in the alley and refused to name it. She was done refusing. "Okay," she said. "Not tonight." He told her about the gala the way he told her most things, directly. No preamble. The syndicate held an annual summit, the city's underworld and overworld in the same room. Politicians, developers, corporate architects, men whose names appeared in newspapers for charitable donations, and men whose names were spoken carefully in specific rooms. They all came. This year, he wanted her there. "Why?" she said. He looked at her across the dinner table. "Because I'm going to do something at this gala that I want you to witness. And because after it, I want everyone in that room to know who you are." She held his gaze. "That sounds like a threat." "To them," he said. "It is." The morning of the gala, Minji arrived with a garment rack, and Ella stood in front of the bedroom mirror and felt the specific dislocation of watching yourself become something you hadn't known you were capable of being. The gown was silk, the color of deep emerald, structured at the shoulders, fluid below, made for a specific body and now having found it. The diamonds at her throat were architectural rather than decorative, a collar of stones that caught light and distributed it back into the room in a way that made her the brightest thing in whatever space she entered. Her hair was up, precise, formal. She looked like someone who had made a decision. Insu came to the doorway. Black, as always, bespoke darkness, the choice of a man who had decided years ago that camouflage wasn't for him and had chosen instead to be unmistakably himself. He looked at her with the complete, unhurried attention she had grown familiar with. "Ready," he said. Not a question. She looked at herself one more time, at the woman who had worked 3 jobs and eaten fast food and not slept, and not asked for help, and not let anyone close enough to carry any part of it. "Yes," she said. The hidden language of the Korean syndicate gala, how Seoul's criminal elite and political class have operated in the same rooms for decades, and what that world looks like from the inside. The building announced itself without effort. A converted cultural center lit from outside with the restraint of something that had nothing to prove. Black cars filled the drive. Men in suits and women in gowns moved through the entrance with the precise choreography of people who had long since mapped their position relative to everyone else in the room. Ella walked in beside Insu and felt the room rearrange. Not loudly. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes moved toward him and recalibrated. The room's center of gravity shifted. He moved through it with the patience of a man who had organized this evening down to the minute. He introduced her to no one and needed to introduce her to no one. She was beside him. In this room, that was its own complete sentence. She was halfway through her first glass of wine when she saw the first face. She recognized him before she recognized why. A jaw. A posture. The specific way a man holds his head when he has spent his entire life being looked at upward. Kang Junho, 47 now, broader across the middle, wearing a suit that cost as much as Insu's and landed completely differently. A property developer. His name was on construction boards all over the city, the kind of name attached to buildings that displaced residents and won architectural awards simultaneously. He had 2 men with him, and the energy of someone accustomed to arriving places and having them reorganize. He had not seen her yet. She looked at Insu. Insu was already looking at Junho. His expression was unchanged, from how it had been all evening. Still, controlled, present. But there was something in the stillness now that hadn't been there before. The stillness of a man who has arrived at the last page of a very long document and is reading the final line. "He doesn't know you're here," she said quietly. "Not yet," Insu said. "He will." What Junho didn't understand about the man across the room, what none of them understood, was that they had already lost. Not tonight. Not when Insu said their names. They had lost 14 months ago, when Insu had purchased their primary lenders through holding companies they'd never be able to trace back to him. Tonight wasn't an attack. Tonight was a notification. Junho arrived at their orbit at 9:47. He saw Insu, recalibrated, extended his hand with the practiced ease of someone who knew how to meet power. "Boss Choi, it's an honor." Kang Junho. Something in the way Insu said it stopped the sentence entirely. "Harim Elite, class of 2015. His voice was quiet, complete, requiring no additional force. "You calculated my weight in front of a PE teacher. You held my sketchbook over your head and called my drawings sad." He looked at Junho with the patience of a man who has been waiting a very long time for a room to be full enough. "Look at the woman beside me." Junho turned. Ella watched the recognition arrive, watched it complicate, watched everything he thought he knew about this evening begin to restructure itself in real time. She sat in the corner with the boy everyone ignored, Insu said. She was the only person in that building who treated him like his presence in a room was not an insult to the room. A pause. "I want you to understand who you are standing in front of." The room had gone quiet, not the cafeteria quality quiet of an audience choosing entertainment, but the specific quiet of people who understood that something with real consequence was happening and that their only correct position was stillness. Your company's debt restructuring, the municipal contract irregularities, the Singapore shell account your CFO manages under a name that isn't yours. Insu listed these the way you read from a prepared document, calmly, without pleasure. "I've held all of that for 2 years. I purchased your primary lender 14 months ago. Your licenses renew through a holding company you don't know I own." A pause. "You don't have a business, Junho. You have a building I let you stand in." Total silence. Junho's face had gone the gray of a man whose floor has just revealed itself to be air. He was not alone. Around the room, at a signal Ella hadn't seen given, 3 other conversations had arrived at the same juncture simultaneously. Men she recognized from Harim's hallways, older now, but carrying the same bones. Park. Lee. The one who had pushed Insu's shoulder. The one who had made the chair joke. Each of them being shown the same documents, each arriving at the same gray understanding. Insu had not done this in anger. That was the thing that hit Ella's chest and stayed there. There was no rage in him, no performance of vengeance, no heat. He had built this the way he had built everything, systematically, patiently, over years, with the precision of someone who understood that the most complete form of accountability is structural, not emotional. He had made them dependent on him before they even knew he existed. And now, he was calling it. "You will issue formal written apologies to the woman beside me," Insu said, "sent to an address she will provide. All of you." He looked at each man in turn as his people delivered the same sentence simultaneously around the room. "Then you will take whatever remains of your companies and leave, and you will spend the rest of your careers understanding that your continued operation depends entirely on her continued well-being." One of them, Park, said, with the desperate energy of someone attempting a foothold, "You can't—" "I already did," Insu said. "Tonight isn't the threat. Tonight is the notification." The room processed this. Junho looked at his shoes. Then, slowly, with the specific quality of a man whose body has finally received the message his mind had been refusing, he bent forward. Not a bow of respect. Something lower. Something more complete. The others followed. Ella stood in emerald silk and syndicate diamonds and watched the men who had aimed the world's smallness at a quiet boy with tape-repaired glasses fold themselves toward the floor of the room they no longer owned. She did not feel triumphant. She felt something quieter and more lasting, the specific gravity of a correction that had been a decade overdue, finally arriving. Then Insu turned to face her. The room was watching. Every person still standing in it. Politicians, criminal architects, the men and women who ran Seoul from angles that appeared in no official record, all of them watching. She understood this. Insu looked at her for one long moment. His face carried everything it always carried. The controlled stillness, the decade of it, the cost of it. And underneath that, visible now in a way it hadn't been in the alley, the thing that had survived every year of whatever his grandfather had made him endure. The thing that had looked like relief when he'd placed his coat on her shoulders on a wet concrete floor at 2 a.m. He went down to one knee, not as he had in the alley, not the private gesture of a man returning something owed in the dark. This was in front of every person in the room, at the center of the Underworld's annual gathering, in a space where power was the only language spoken. He was the most powerful person in it. And he was kneeling. "I built everything I have," he said, not loudly, but the room was completely silent and his voice carried without effort. "So that no one could ever again stand between you and safety. Every company, every alliance, every year." He looked up at her. "Not to own you. To make the world small enough that nothing in it could threaten you without answering to me." Ella looked down at him. She thought about the corner table. A sketchbook of cities pushed across a cafeteria surface by a boy who had never shown anyone what he drew. 40 minutes at a bus stop. 2 years of 3 jobs and not asking for help. A glass case in a private study, lit by a dedicated light, holding a pair of glasses repaired with tape and preserved for 10 years. About what it meant to be someone's fixed point for a decade without ever knowing it. "Stand up, Insu," she said quietly. He rose. She stepped forward. 1 step, closing the distance she had been maintaining since the alley, and placed her hand against the side of his face. Not softly, not dramatically. Just her hand against his jaw, grounding both of them in the same moment, the same room, the same decade finally, fully arrived at. He went very still, like something that had been in motion for 10 years had finally, for the first time, stopped. "You could have just called?" she said. The corner of his mouth moved, the place where a smile came from. "I know," he said. Behind them, Seoul burned amber and endless through the glass, indifferent, enormous, the city that had tried to make him invisible, and had made him instead into the man who owned its darkness. The room exhaled around them, and the man who had once walked close to walls so the width of hallways wouldn't become a conversation, stood at the center of the world's most dangerous room, in the full light of everything he had built, with the woman who had first told him he was worth more than the space he was standing in. And for the first time in 10 years, he believed it completely. What happens when Ella discovers the full truth of what Insu's grandfather did to him during those 10 years? And whether she can love a man shaped by a decade of darkness? The next chapter in their story. She looked at him, at Insu, at the boy and the man and the decade compressed between them, and she made the decision she had been moving toward since the alley, since the display case, since the moment she understood that every ruthless thing he had become had been built as a shelter with her name on it. "Okay," she said. "Not surrender, not rescue, resolution." He reached up and covered her hand with his. Once. Briefly. The restraint of a man who had been careful with her for 10 years and was not about to stop. The city kept moving below them. And somewhere in Seoul, in a corner cafeteria table that no longer existed, a boy with tape-repaired glasses and an impossible sketchbook had drawn a city where 2 people could eat lunch without performing for anyone. He had spent 10 years building it. She had spent 10 years walking toward it without knowing where it was. They had both, finally, arrived. You just watched a boy who the world buried rise. Not because he became harder than them. Not because he got revenge. But because he spent 10 years making the world answerable to the one person who had ever treated him like he was worth something. And she spent those same 10 years carrying everyone else's weight, refusing to let anyone carry hers, until the night she had nothing left and someone who had been watching over her from a distance finally stepped into the light. If you've ever been the person in the corner, if you've ever sat beside someone that everyone else had already written off, if you've ever protected someone when it cost you something real, this story was built for you. And if this is the first video of ours you've ever watched, I need you to understand something. This is just the beginning of what we build in this space. Every week, we bring you stories like this, cinematic, emotional, the kind of romance that doesn't apologize for going deep. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, because the next story is already in production, and it is going to devastate you in the best possible way. And if this story moved you, if Insu and Ella lived in your chest for even 5 minutes, drop a comment below. Tell me which moment broke you open. Tell me what you felt when he knelt on that alley floor. Tell me what you thought when she found the glasses. Because the comments are where this community lives. And every comment you leave tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to be seen. You watched until the end. That means something. Now let us know you were here.